Welcome to Out Motorsports, the channel for cars as you are. My name is Jake, and I am here with a special edition of the Alfa Romeo Stelvio. The Stelvio has been on sale for a handful of years at this point, but this is the Alfa Romeo Stelvio Estrema, which I'm probably mispronouncing because I don't speak Italian at all. However, the Estrema is a special edition for the 2023 model year, and they are making these in very limited quantities for both the Stelvio and the Giulia, which is the sedan. This is, of course, the crossover. So let's talk about what the Estrema is in Stelvio form, and then we'll get on the road and talk about how it actually is to drive. Okay, so first of all, what is the Alfa Romeo Stelvio? Well, like I said, it's been on sale for a while. This is, of course, a kind of compact crossover in size. It competes with things like the BMW X3, the Mercedes-Benz GLC, the Audi Q5, that sort of thing. It's a hot segment. Everyone is selling at least one vehicle like this, if not more. And the Stelvio tries to set itself apart, even in its most basic trim, by being one of those for people who love to drive. You know, it's Italian, there's a lot of emotion behind it. The styling is very interesting. They sell it in a bunch of fun and amazing colors, and they go for that pull at your heartstrings sort of vibe, even, like I said, with the base model, and then all the way up to the hottest, craziest Quadrifoglio, which has a 2.9 liter, 505 horsepower engine that is derived from a Ferrari engine. So that is the nutty one, but the problem with the Quadrifoglio is that you have to pay for it, and it's like 87 grand. It's an expensive car for something that's this size. So what Alfa did here with the Estrema is they took everything good about their lower trim models with the 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder, and then they added some bits from the Quadrifoglio to make it a little sportier. So then what did Alfa Romeo pull from the Quadrifoglio versus keep from the lower trim Stelvios? Well, like I said, the engine is pulled straight out of the lower trim Stelvios. This is basically a Stelvio Veloce, which is the top trim other than the Quadrifoglio, which means 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder, 280 horsepower, 306 pound-feet of torque, and that is paired to an 8-speed torque converter automatic, and in the case of the Estrema, standard all-wheel drive. They call it Q4 all-wheel drive. That's the drivetrain you're working with. That is straight out of the Veloce. What is different with the Estrema is going to be your suspension and your differential on this back axle. So suspension-wise, the lower trim Stelvios come with just a fixed rate suspension. So fixed dampers, nothing's adjustable there. It just kind of is what it is. With the Estrema, they pulled the adjustable adaptive suspension off of the Quadrifoglio and put it on here. So you've got two different damper settings. You've got a normal, like, soft mode, and then you've got a firmer mode when you put the car in its dynamic drive mode setting. And then the other thing they did is they pulled the rear differential off of the Stelvio Quadrifoglio. So that's a limited slip differential, and the benefit there is that even if you've got one of these two back wheels on some low traction surface like ice or mud or whatever, it will keep the other wheel moving. It will send all that power to the other side of the axle. A lot of all-wheel drive systems, including this one, will try to do that by using the brakes to sort of brake the spinning wheel and send power, but having the mechanical limited slip diff really helps in that case. So that's kind of your practical application. The other benefit of having that LSD is going to be on spirited driving. So when you've got, some good back roads or something that you're hitting, if you're in dynamic mode and all that, that differential is also going to help put power down to both wheels when you're leaving a corner. This is all-wheel drive, but having that LSD will help you push things around. It's a rear-biased all-wheel drive system, so being able to put all that power down is indeed helpful. And I say all that power because Alfa Romeo is very proud of the fact that this is the highest horsepower, highest torque vehicle in its class. So they're very excited. They've mentioned that a couple times when I was talking to them about this Estrema. So we'll talk about how that actually pans out in the real world in just a second. This is also allegedly the lightest vehicle in its class. It weighs about 4,000 pounds, which is, I don't know, not bad for something this size, I think. As far as other things going on with the Estrema, you've got these wheels. These are a 21-inch wheel. The finish is unique to the Estrema as far as being this kind of dark gray. And then you've got some carbon fiber bits going on. You've got carbon fiber mirror caps and some interior trim and those sorts of things. And then the other big thing that you get is a 14-speaker Harman Kardon sound system. Now, I mentioned these are being built in limited quantities. I believe they're making just shy of 400 of these in Stelvio form. And then price-wise, this is intended to bridge that gap between the Stelvio Veloce and the Stelvio Quadrifoglio, and it's a pretty big gap. So the Veloce is like 54 grand, the Quadrifoglio is like $187. This comes in with this Misano blue paint, which I love. This is one of a few paint options. This one is an upcharge of about $660, and this comes in right around $61,000. So it does bridge that gap, and it stays more on the affordable side as these vehicles go, right around 60 grand versus pushing toward 90 like that Quad does. So that's what's going on with the Stelvio Estrema. Now let's get behind the wheel and talk about how it is to drive. All right, so let's talk about driving the 2023 Alfa Romeo Stelvio Estrema. That is a mouthful. Like I said, 2-liter turbo 4, we'll come back to that in a second, but the handling improvements are really where Alfa says this thing shines. And if I get this down into a lower gear, we've got a little bit of an off-ramp here, and it does handle pretty well. It turns in nicely. You can feel the diff helping put power down. And yeah, generally the handling of this car I think is great for what it is. And the other nice thing with the adaptive suspension is that you've got this DNA selector, and it's D for dynamic, N for normal, and A is whatever the Italian word is for efficiency. It's the eco mode. But when you put it in dynamic and everything stiffens up for suspension, there's also a button right here in the middle for the dampers, which means you can have dynamic mode for your throttle response and your steering weight and all that, and then you can push this button and go to soft damper mode, which I actually really like for city driving because I don't need the stiffness. I don't want to be hitting bumps and things with the dampers turned all the way up, so I can just hit this button, and then as soon as I want it back into its sporty mode, just hit it again. So really like that there's no like menus to go through on the infotainment or anything. It's just simple right here. And the car in normal mode is fine. It's just a little more laggy throttle input and a little bit laggier transmission programming, which I don't love because that pairs to this 2-liter 4-cylinder and the 8-speed. And the 4-cylinder, it may make the most power and torque in the class, and it is nothing to sneeze at. This is not a slow car, but there's no drama here. And I find that a little disappointing because Alfa Romeo, like I said, is kind of all about the passion and the excitement and the sex appeal and all this stuff. This 4-cylinder, like, ain't it, at least not for me. The exhaust, I think, is what kills it for me. It likes to rev enough, but it just doesn't feel like it enjoys it. And having something a little more shouty going on, I think, would really make me happier and feel like that kind of completes the package for the Estrema. If you have like the base model Stelvio, of course, it's just a kind of, you know, whatever crossover, like every other whatever crossover in this segment. They can be pretty basic and a little boring, or they can be zhuzhed up and really fun. And I just wish it sounded a little better. I don't necessarily care that it's not a bigger engine. Some people online, when I shared that we were reviewing this car, said, oh, they need to have another engine between the Turbo 4 and the Ferrari-derived 2.9 V6. And like they could, but I suspect there's some cost implications there, or, you know, the economics of it don't make sense, which, fine. But I think just this with a different exhaust or something would make me a little happier and sound a lot more perky. Otherwise, the ride quality is great. I really, really like this with the adaptive suspension. I have not driven one of these on the base suspension, so I can't compare the two, unfortunately, but does really nicely. The steering, I think, is pretty accurate, decent feel for what it is. And, you know, pedal inputs, like I said, the throttle in normal mode can be a little laggy, kind of frustrating, but you put it in dynamic mode and it's pretty good there. The braking inputs are really nice. You know, the pedal has good feel, good initial bite, good feel through the pedal travel, so it's predictable everywhere. The other thing with driving this Stelvio, the paddle shifters on this car are mounted on the steering column, not on the steering wheel. And that is something that, you know, you see in various cars. I think you see it more in things like Ferraris and Lamborghinis, and, you know, higher end kind of supercar vehicles. And the point of having them on the column versus the wheel is that the paddles never move. So if you're, you know, driving and, you know, you're in a high performance driving scenario, if you're on a track, on an on-ramp, a back road, whatever, the paddles are always where they have been versus turning with the wheel. So if you end up, you know, crossed up, you may not know which paddle does what. Do I think it's the most effective thing? I don't know. Every other vehicle I've driven recently with paddle shifters has them on the wheel, so they're always right where your hands are if you're keeping your hands at 9 and 3, and I've gotten used to that. I think I would get used to these gigantic paddle shifters. I mean, these could be brake calipers on another vehicle, and they're just so big. But the benefit there is they're always there for you. The downside is that I have, I think, largish hands for, you know, as humans go, and even I think it's a long reach to the turn signal and the wiper stalks, because they're behind the paddles. The paddles stick out a little bit and they're gigantic, like I said, and it's taken me some getting used to as far as finding where the stalks are. So I could see where if you have smaller hands, especially women, you may have a tough time with this. Just a thought. Otherwise, the cabin in here, other than, you know, the carbon fiber trim and those sorts of little things, is the same as every other Stelvio. I like it quite a bit. This is my first time spending any real time in any, you know, Stelvio or Giulia, and I know some of this is probably due for a refresh soon. It's been the same for a bunch of years, but I do like it quite a bit. You do have this dial that helps control the infotainment, but it is a touchscreen. You have Android Auto and Apple CarPlay over a cord, but you've got a nice dial here so you can control certain things with it. You've got a volume control right here, which is great, falls nicely at hand, and then your steering wheel controls are also very logically laid out. Easy to use while driving, pretty easy to get used to. You've got dual zone climate, heated seats, heated steering wheel, that's all great. The one amusing thing, which I think Alfa is perhaps the only company that could like get away with this, is just little quirks. So you've got your engine start-stop button on the steering wheel, which is not super duper quirky at this point. Several brands have done that, or they put it on the top of the shifter or whatever. The most amusing thing to me is that your door lock switches on the doors, lock is at the top and unlock is at the bottom, which flies in the face of established standards for how door lock controls work, in that up is unlock, the locks go up, down is lock, the locks go down. I find it so amusing that that's just how this is, and it's fine. There's probably no real reason to why it was done that way. It's just something amusing that I noticed. Only other thing going on in here, like I mentioned, you get that Harman Kardon 14-speaker sound system, which I think is very good for what it is. It's an enjoyable sound system, and you know, it's not like a blow-your-mind sort of setup like Burmester necessarily in Mercedes-Benz, but I do think it is very, very good. Now, one more time, just hearing that engine away from a stoplight, if I give some space and give it the beans here. We are moving, this is a plenty quick vehicle. It's the lightest in its class, it's the most power and torque in its class, so like, yay. That engine note just doesn't really do it for me. Other than that, I think it's a very enjoyable vehicle to drive. This is one where, you know, there are certain vehicles in this segment, you know, that focus in very different ways. That are not trying to be sporty, they're never gonna be sporty. This is definitely a vehicle that's like, for the driving enthusiast. That's the focus. And I think they mostly get it. Exhaust note is the miss for me. Everything else I do find enjoyable. I wish the throttle was a touch snappier. I wish the transmission was a touch snappier. It does all work in the dynamic mode, but I think most people probably don't use drive modes as much as we all hope they do. So I always look for something that's excellent in its normal mode, and this is not quite to my taste. I'm sure for a lot of people just kind of smushing around town, not caring about much, it is exactly to their taste. So good news is you've got the options. I would just prefer things to be a touch more turned up in certain ways. All right, and that is it for this review of the 2023 Alfa Romeo Stelvio Estrema. Thank you so much for coming along. As always, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe right here on YouTube. Give us a follow on Facebook and Instagram, and maybe Twitter at Out Motorsports, if that's still around by the time you watch this. And if you'd like to connect with a community of LGBT automotive enthusiasts and motorsports competitors, head over to outmotorsports.com. We've got a whole community there, and we're planning some events both in person and online for 2023. We would love to have you join us. Until next time, please stay safe, be well, see you again soon.